Wanda Kessler backed her stock trailer up to the barn on a raw Tuesday morning in March and unloaded 130 guinea fowl, every single one of them mid-molt, patched bald across the neck and wings like they'd been plucked halfway by a careless hand. A commercial hatchery 2 counties over was liquidating its breeder flock at $4 a bird because nobody wanted ugly poultry in that condition, and Wanda had bought the whole lot before the auctioneer finished his second call. Dale Utley, who ran the hay operation across the county road, happened to be dropping off a load of straw when he saw them come off the trailer. He stood at the fence a long moment, then said what half of Bellwood County would end up saying in the weeks that followed. "Wanda, those birds look like they lost a fight with a weed trimmer. You paid money for that?" She didn't answer him. She latched the gate and went inside to check on the flock. Hit that like button, drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from tonight. Now, let's begin. Wanda was 52, a widow of 6 years, and she ran 11 acres outside the small town of Hollis Fork, Georgia, on land that had belonged to her mother's side of the family since the 1950s. She kept a modest produce stand at the end of her driveway, tomatoes, okra, muscadine grapes in season, and it had carried her through the lean years after her husband's construction business folded and then after his death. The stand had done well enough until the spring before, when copperheads and rat snakes started showing up in the tomato rows in numbers nobody in Hollis Fork could remember seeing before. 2 customers had been bitten, neither seriously, but word traveled fast in a town that small, and her weekend traffic dropped by more than half. She tried repellent granules, mothballs along the fence line, even a paid service out of Valdosta that caught exactly 1 snake in 6 weeks. None of it worked, and the county extension office told her plainly that a heavy rodent population was likely feeding the snakes, with no simple fix for that. She spent the winter turning the problem over, without a workable answer, watching her savings do the same slow bleed as her tomato sales. It was her great-aunt Audie Fitch who unknowingly handed her the answer, 4 years after Audie had passed. Wanda had inherited a cedar hope chest and left it unopened in the spare room until a leak in the roof forced her to move it that January. Inside, wrapped in a flour sack cloth, was a small dented tin box that had once held snuff. She pried the rusted lid loose with a butter knife and found a folded sheet of ledger paper gone soft and brown at the creases. In Audie's cramped handwriting, dated 1971, was a running account of a flock of guinea fowl, kept specifically, the note said, because they clear a yard of snakes faster than any cat and don't cost near what the man from the co-op wanted to charge. Below that, a count of 40 birds, a sketch of a fenced run, and a line that read, "Not one snake bite reported on this place in 9 years since." Wanda sat on the floor with the tin box open in her lap for a long time. She had heard, vaguely, that guinea fowl went after snakes and insects, the sort of thing people mentioned as folk curiosity rather than real method. Seeing it written down in her own family's hand, with a number and a date attached, felt less like a rumor and more like a report. She mentioned the plan to exactly 3 people, and none of them thought much of it. Her son, in Macon, said over the phone that it sounded like a lot of loud birds for a maybe. The extension agent, a soft-spoken man named Marcus Yates, said guinea fowl were sometimes used for tick and insect control on small farms, but he'd never personally documented one clearing a snake population and couldn't promise results. And Dale Utley, once he learned what the birds were for, laughed outright in the feed store parking lot. "Guineas are just loud chickens with a mean streak," he told her, loud enough for the man behind the counter to hear. "They get eaten by foxes before they get around to eating much of anything else. You'd have done better with a barn cat and a shotgun." He wasn't being cruel, not really. Dale had run cattle and hay in Bellwood County for 30 years and had simply never seen guinea fowl do anything but strut around making noise. From where he stood, A woman spending $520 on 130 half-bald birds to fix a snake problem looked like grief and desperation talking. She let him finish. She didn't mention the tin box, or Audie, or the ledger. She went home and got to work. She started a logbook the same week the birds arrived, the same brand of composition notebook Audie had apparently favored, and she kept it on the kitchen counter where she'd see it every morning. March 14th, 130 birds in the run. Fencing reinforced along the north side where the fox tracks were heaviest. 2 snake sightings logged near the tomato beds this week, same as before. March 22nd, feathers filling back in on most of the flock. Released 40 birds into the outer garden fence during daylight hours only, penned back up before dusk. 1 guinea cornered something in the squash vines, and the flock rushed it screaming, loud enough that Wanda came running with a hoe, a 4-foot rat snake. It didn't come back out. March 29th, snake sightings down to 1 for the week. Lost 1 guinea to a fox through a gap near the gate. Patched the fence that night by flashlight. April 5th, released the full flock into the garden and pasture edge by day. 0 snake sightings. Rodent activity near the corn crib, heavy all winter, noticeably down. Fewer droppings, no fresh burrows along the tree line. April 12th, 0 snakes, 2nd week running. A neighbor 2 properties down mentioned, unprompted, that she hadn't seen a single snake near her own coop either, and her yard backs up to Wanda's pasture. April 19th, 0 snakes, 3rd week. Flock fully refeathered. Egg count climbing, now averaging 19 a day, enough to sell alongside the produce. April 26th, 4th week with no snake sightings anywhere on the property, including the outer fence line where the worst of it had been the year before. Wanda drove out to Audie's old home place, now owned by a cousin, and confirmed the original coop foundation was still visible behind the barn, exactly where the sketch in the tin box had shown it. She told Dale none of this, and told her son only that things were coming along. She kept the notebook, kept the birds moving through the garden in a rotation she adjusted week by week, and waited. By the 2nd week of May, the change was hard to miss even for someone not looking for it. The produce stand traffic had crept back up as word spread that nobody had seen a snake on the Kessler place in 2 months. A mother who'd sworn off the stand after her son was bitten the previous summer came back and bought a full bushel of tomatoes, telling Wanda she'd heard from a neighbor that something had changed out there. The guinea fowl, fully feathered now and considerably calmer than their molting selves had been in March, patrolled the garden rows in a loose, noisy cluster every afternoon, and more than one customer stopped to watch them work a fence line, the way some people watch fireworks. Marcus Yates came out in late May at Wanda's invitation, not entirely convinced he'd find anything worth writing up. He walked the property with her for the better part of an hour, checking the rodent bait stations he'd set the previous fall, all but empty, and comparing them to the snake sighting log she'd kept since March. He went quiet for a moment, then knelt down and pressed his palm flat against a stretch of clear pasture where a snake den had been the year before. "There's nothing here," he said, and it wasn't a question. 2 weeks later, he sent Wanda a short written note for the county's small farm newsletter, calling her Guinea Fowl rotation a documented and repeatable method for reducing snake activity through habitat and prey source disruption, and asking if she'd be willing to sell breeding stock to 2 other farms in the county already asking about it. Dale showed up on a Saturday not long after, walked straight to the garden fence without a word, and crouched down to touch the wire where a guinea was pecking through the grass just inches from his boot. "I'll be damned," he said quietly, mostly to himself. He didn't apologize out loud. He just stood there a while, watching the birds work, then bought 4 dozen eggs on his way out. By the following spring, Wanda had sold breeding pairs to 6 farms across 3 counties, kept a waiting list in the same composition notebook she'd once used for snake counts, and started teaching her granddaughter how to read the log the way Audie had once kept her own. The tin box sits on the kitchen windowsill now, lid open, holding nothing but a folded page of new notes. If this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who's been told their idea was too strange to work. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever trusted an old family method everyone else had written off, I want to hear about it. Every comment gets read. This story was created with the help of artificial intelligence and is intended for entertainment and storytelling purposes.